Howdy, and welcome back to your Flip Classroom. Today we're going to be talking about the evidences of evolution. And the first thing I want to tell you is we did not come from monkeys. A lot of people are going to say that evolution, the theory of evolution, says that we came from monkeys, and that's just not true. Okay? So we're going to talk about what the theory actually does say. So at the end of this video, you need to understand the theory of evolution, know the different evidences of evolution, and understand phylogenetic trees. Please make sure you're taking good notes with illustrations, and then use your notes and the video to complete the knowledge check. All right. Evolution. Now, evolution simply means change over time. That's all it means, change over time. And this is the process by which modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. Now, this is just a theory, but it is a very well-supported theory with a testable hypothesis and explanation of the phenomena that we see happening in the natural world. Now, in a given area, the more advanced species survives. This doesn't necessarily mean the strongest. It also doesn't mean the smartest or the fastest or the most pink or the most purple or whatever. It means the one that is better suited for the environment. And the previous species in that area is going to be eliminated. Now, this is why humans cannot have evolved from monkeys, because we would have eliminated that species, okay? All right, so let's talk about kind of evolution and how it works, right? Divergent evolution. So this is when a population becomes isolated from the rest of the species and there's new selection pressures on that species, and it can cause it to evolve into a new species. Now, we've all heard about Darwin's finches, the example there being, we had too many finches in one area feeding on nuts, and so a small group left to a nearby island because there's too many birds, not enough food for everybody, so some of them left, went to a nearby island, and on that nearby island, what happened is there wasn't as many nuts. There was actually more fruit. Well, you know how your lips might be bigger than your parents, or they might be smaller than your parents. Well, kind of imagine that as it relates to bird beaks, right? Kind of a similar thing there. So if you think about beaks being a little bit bigger, well, maybe those can handle fruits better than the nuts. And so those birds that went to that new island where there was more fruit, if they had that bigger beak, they were able to eat the fruit better, which means they had more availability for food, which means they had more better, stronger lives, and they gave birth to more babies. The ones who only had the beak suited for nuts, there wasn't as many. They had a harder time surviving, would have possibly died off or not had as many children, and so on. And so we've got all these fruit-eating finches doing a lot better. Now, what happens is we have more and more offspring until eventually the ones that had nuts disappear, and all we have left on that island are birds with the big beak. Now, this is an example of diverging from our original species and creating a new one. So two different areas, two different species now. Same thing with tortoises and the Galapagos. We have these tortoises with really short necks that live on some of the islands that have grasses down on the ground where they can easily bend their neck down and eat it. Whereas some of those guys moved off to another island, and on that island there wasn't a lot of vegetation on the ground. The vegetation was actually higher up, and so in order to reach it, they had to be able to stretch and reach up. So those who had longer necks survived better because they were able to reach it. As you can see, this guy, not a lot of vegetation on the ground. So this low-necked turtle would not survive on that island. All right, let's talk about one of the evidences of evolution, biogeography. This is one of our evidences, and it just talks about the distribution of species. It says that if you isolate the species like we did with those birds on the island, or even the tortoises on the island, they can evolve into new species as they change because there's different pressures, different food sources, different location of the food, right? So they're going to change based off of that and eventually can create a new species. Isolation can also lead to a lack of common species. For example, if you go to Australia, the marsupials there are very prolific. We have kangaroos and we have koalas and things like that, whereas nowhere else in the world do we really see marsupials in current day, because in current day, most of the world is really covered in these placental mammals, dogs, cats, bears, horses, things like that, who outcompeted all other marsupial life there, okay? So we know that when we went into Australia and started evolving into these different types of marsupials because there wasn't any pressures against them. Now, Hawaii and New Zealand, they actually originally had no mammals. We had to bring all the mammals with us to Hawaii and New Zealand. These were islands separated from the mainlands, and so things didn't live there. So we can actually see as things move around, why they move there, how they're isolated, and the selection pressures that would allow them to be there or not be there through biogeography or life earth illustration, right? Biogeograph. All right. So homologies. So homologies, homo means the same. So when we talk about homologies, we're talking about having the same form but a different function. So we're going to have it's going to have the same physical structure, but it's going to be used in a different way. So when we talk about homologies, we're going to be comparing the physical structure of one organism and see the similarities and differences. Here we're looking for those similarities to be able to go back to a common ancestor. Say, look, this is the first creature that had a hand. Now we start looking at all these things that start popping out with hands, okay? So the more similar you are to someone physically, oftentimes the more closely related you are. Now, that's not always the case, but when we talk about homologies, that is something that we do see. For example, humans have all these different bones, right? Our phalanges and our radius and our ulna and whatnot. Well, we have a similar form in the dog hand. They actually have all the same bones, but they're shaped a little bit differently. And because they're shaped differently, they have a different function. We use our hand to grab things. Dogs use theirs to run. If you look at, I'm going to jump over to the whale here. If we look at the whale, again, similar bones. They're in a different shape, but they're all the same bones. And they have a slightly different function, obviously allowing them to swim or guide themselves as they swim. And as you get even further away, we start finding like a bird. See, these have similar bones, definitely a way different function. And you can tell that this guy's a lot further away evolutionarily because it's not as close in shape to each other, right? Human and dog would obviously be the closest of all of them, and then human to bird would be really, really far away. All right, let's talk about vestigial structures. So vestigial structures are really cool. I love these things. So this suggests common ancestry as well. So this is where you're going to see a structure that's no longer needed for survival, and so it starts to go away. My favorite one is the Plica semiluminaris in humans, which is like this little dot right here. I'm going to highlight on the screen. That little dot right there in humans, it's the remnant of a nictitating membrane, which is kind of like a third eyelid that we would use to like protect our eye in sandstorms and stuff. And so this has obviously gone away in mammals, most mammals. There's like one, I think, that has it. Anyways, but it's gone away. And it's a lot smaller, and you'll see mammals having that remnant of it. But you can look in other organisms, and they do have it. So this is a vestigial structure. It was no longer needed, so it started to go away. Whales have a pelvic bone, which suggests that they had legs, right? So the pelvis is the bone in your body where your legs are going to attach. Whales came from land mammals and moved into ocean-dwelling organisms, and that pelvis bone allows us to see that it became something that they didn't need, and so it started to reduce because it was being selected against. It actually got in their way, and therefore they needed it to go away. So over time, those organisms who had smaller legs did better because they were able to move through the water faster, and therefore that just started disappearing. The appendix in humans is another example. I want to talk about a non-example. A lot of people talk about the thumb and you go, oh, well, the thumb is smaller and therefore the thumb has to be a vestigial structure. Well, in truth, it's not. See, we're still using it. It's still really important, so it's not going away. It just happens to be smaller. So just because something is small does not mean that it's vestigial. All right, let's talk about fossil evidence. So another evidence of evolution here, besides the ones we've been talking about. Fossils are found in sedimentary rock layers. You've probably learned a little bit about that in 8th grade. Sedimentary rock, that's where we get all the dirt and it packs down to create sedimentary rock. Now, thanks to this, we have the law of superposition, meaning that the oldest stuff goes first, then we put a little bit younger and a little bit younger and a little bit younger until we have the youngest stuff on top. That's all that means. Law of superposition, really important. Write that down. This allows us to order the appearance of organisms in time. So we can look at the bottom of the rocks and say, look, this is the oldest stuff, and as we get higher, This is the newest stuff. So paleontology reveals to us the existence of species that came before us and are extinct, and then may have evolved into modern species. So old stuff at the bottom, new stuff at the top. The further down you go, the further back in time you go. We're looking millions of years down here, and so on. All right. So an example being Pakicetus. This is what eventually became into whales. So it's a land-dwelling organism. Started spending a lot of time in the water. So those like Ambulocetus, it was better for it to be able to move in the water. It needed to be more streamlined. And then we get over here, and you can see the tail is getting bigger and the back legs are getting smaller because it's using those less and using the tail more to help it swim. So this is being selected for. The tail is doing a really good job, so we really like it. So those with better tails and smaller legs do better, have more children, and therefore we start moving into our mysticetes and our odontocetes, both our baleen and our toothed whales. Another evidence, DNA evidence. So just like we talked about before, we can use that to show relationships between, mom and dad with their kid. We can actually do this as an entire species. We can do DNA fingerprinting to show similarities in the DNA. The more closely your DNA fingerprint is to another organism's, the more closely related you are, obviously. Now, this doesn't mean that they evolve from one another. It simply means that you have something in the past that is a common ancestor. Just like your cousin and you have a common ancestor in your grandparents, but you do not have the same parents. Keep in mind that you have actually about 50% of your DNA is similar to a banana tree. A lot of people are like, what? But you have a lot of commonality here. You have your cells are both eukaryotes. You have mitochondria. You have Golgi apparatus. All these wonderful things inside the cells that keep you similar. The difference between humans, 99.9% of your DNA is the same as my DNA, is the same as your neighbor's DNA, and so on. So lots of similarities there. It's very small differences in the grand scheme of things. So we can run gels to see that. All right, nucleotides and amino acids. So all life on this planet uses DNA as its base for life. Everything uses DNA. This means that all life is based off of just 4 nucleotides, right? Just those 4. Guanine and cytosine, adenine and thymine. That's it. All life, 4 nucleotides. Every single difference and every similarity we have is based off of 4 things. It's like writing a book with only 4 letters. Okay. Now all eukaryotes are created using the same 20 amino acids. So those 4 nucleotides put together in different pairings create all the create just or code for just 20 different amino acids. Those 20 amino acids come together to create all the diversity that is life. So another evidence here. Embryology, this one's really cool. Looking at the embryo of organisms can show common ancestry. The embryo of a human, you actually, as an embryo, will have protogills that start to form and then stop and go away. Thankfully, we don't have gills, right? And then you have a tail that starts forming, and then it obviously disappears before birth. So here's an example. These are embryos from different organisms like fish and a tortoise, and a hog, and a calf, and a rabbit, and a human. And if you look at them, they all are very similar. They all have those protogills. They all have a tail. This means that we were probably somewhere related way, 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 way back in the past. And we change and develop as we get older, and then we end up looking completely different. Phylogenetic trees. So this is really just a branching diagram to represent common ancestors, okay? So it shows evolutionary relationships based on similarities and differences. All life came from the primordial ooze and has since branched out. So if you think about all life, and then it branches, and then from there we can branch again and so on. It's like your grandparents gave birth to your parents and your uncle, and then your uncle and your aunt made your cousin, and your parents made you and your brother. So we're related if you go back far enough. All right, so here's an example of how a phylogenetic tree would work. You're going to want to copy this down. So we had life, and then we start moving into lancelet would be just an example. I've kind of skipped a lot of steps. But if you add vertebrae, then we get everything past this point will have vertebrae. From there we have our lamprey. But then if we also add hinged jaws, everything past this will have hinged jaws like the tuna. And then we go past this, 4 walking legs, the salamander. And then everything past that will have 4 walking legs. Then everything past this will have hair like the leopard. Oh wait, there's a thing here that says you lost your legs. The orca has lost its legs, but it came from something that originally had legs. All right, here's your bibliography. Please use your notes and your knowledge check to take, and your notes in the video to take your knowledge check.